Welcome. We welcome all of you to our congregation, no matter your background, who you are, where you came from or where you are going, whom you love or what you believe. Welcome, you questioners, seekers of truth, pilgrims longing for sanctuary, travelers needing harbor from the storm. How do we make this tender place wider? How do we stretch into a bolder welcome, a more radical generosity of the heart? Can we imagine ourselves the stewards and ushers, not only of our own congregation, but for a wider circle of belonging? Can we commit and recommit to being accountable to one another as an anti-racist, welcoming community that centers marginalized voices, that listens to those voices, especially when what they're saying is hard to hear? Can we be willing to change? When we break our agreements with one another, can we offer amends? There is grace enough here. There is in our midst the possibility of healing, of repair, of making things right within ourselves, between us, and with the wider world. There is in our midst possibility. Welcome home. Good morning. My name is Jan Estes, and I'm your service associate this morning. Welcome to the Sunday service of the Unitarian Universalist of New Braunfels, Texas. We welcome all of you, whether you are zooming in from far away or attending our service in person. This congregation practices a shared ministry, which means that on any given Sunday, we will either learn from our wise minister, the Reverend Ade Krabah, or we will hear different points of view on a broad range of subjects from speakers from within our own congregation or from the larger community. This morning, we are very pleased to welcome one of our own, Bruce Carpenter, as our speaker. Bruce works tirelessly for inclusion of all voices in all walks of the United States life, and many of you will recognize his name from the Herald Zeitun newspaper, where he is published on a fairly regular basis. Next Sunday, we invite you back to hear our own Reverend Ade Krabah. Again, welcome. Just as the flame of a single candle brings light to a dark room, so does the collective flame of truth and compassion that burns within our hearts. As we light the flame of our chalice, let each of us commit to be a part of that collective flame of truth and compassion and bring our light into the world. Let there be light. And now, Bruce Carpenter.
It's great to have the opportunity to gather with all of you again. We spent 2 years being separated. Next week, April 3rd, will be the first time we're going to gather, hopefully without masks, and we'll all see each other's smiles. Those who want to wear masks again, please do so. It's great to be here, and I appreciate that. I'm going to talk a little bit this morning about what Mohandas Gandhi called the 7 dangers to human virtue. And as most of you, I think, know, Gandhi was a very strong advocate of nonviolence, and he believed that immorality was what contributed predominantly to violence in the world. I find that Gandhi is one of the most impactful people of the 20th century. He was a small but well-educated, extremely articulate man, clothed simply in a loincloth and a shawl. But he led a nonviolent movement that gained independence for India's then 360 million people in 1947. The Reverend Martin Luther King and the U.S. Civil Rights Movement later adopted Gandhi's principles of nonviolent civil disobedience. That movement's nonviolent civil disobedience was ultimately responsible for the passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Gandhi took the religious principle of ahimsa, which means doing no harm, common to Buddhism, Hinduism, and Jainism, and turned it into a nonviolent tool for mass action. He used it to fight not only British colonial rule, but social evils such as racial discrimination, and in India, untouchability also. Gandhi called it Satyagraha, which means truth force. In this doctrine, the aim of nonviolent conflict was to convert the opponent, win over his mind and heart, and persuade him to your point of view. Gandhi was firm that Satyagraha was not a weapon of the weak. On the contrary, he said, Satyagraha is a weapon of the strong. It admits of no violence under any circumstance whatsoever, and it always insists upon truth. Gandhi believed the primary cause of violence in the world was immorality. He thought that ethics or moral behavior was desirable not simply because of abstract rules designating right and wrong. Instead, Gandhi said that caring for the welfare of each other, and not only ourselves, creates common expectations and predictability amongst all of us. That provides a predictable social structure which allows us to interact in a predictable fashion. Gandhi's thoughts are the essence of what we often refer to as the Golden Rule. By treating others as one wishes to be treated, we are demonstrating the behavior we expect from others. This rule is a principle commonly held by virtually every religion, faith, or culture because it allows us to react with each other in a predictable fashion. This is also known in philosophy as the principle of reciprocity. Gandhi often spoke about the cause of violence being immorality. In essence, the social contract of accepted behaviors is broken by behaving in an immoral way. An individual, or indeed, in a larger sense, a society, a community, or even a nation can break that social contract, and ultimately the result is almost always violence. Violence either because people react in a negative way to that breach of the social contract, or the person or nation or society breaching the contract attempts to force its views on others, again resulting in violence. Gandhi spoke and wrote about an ethical framework he referred to as the 7 dangers to human virtue. He believed it was these dangers that ultimately led always to violence. In Gandhi's view, avoiding those dangers to virtue would lessen violence in the world. And it's those 7 dangers to human virtue that we're going to talk about a little bit more this morning. Briefly, first to introduce them, those 7 dangers to human virtue are wealth without work, pleasure without conscience, knowledge without character, business without ethics, science without humanity, religion without sacrifice, and politics without principle. Gandhi's grandson introduced one additional, which was rights without responsibility, that would be the 8th danger to human virtue. Gandhi first wrote about these in his weekly newspaper, Young India, on October 22nd, 1925. An almost identical list had been published 6 months earlier in England in a sermon at Westminster Abbey by Frederick Lewis Donaldson. Gandhi wrote that a correspondent, whom he called a fair friend, had sent the list to him. Gandhi's only comment when publishing the list was that these things should not be known merely through intellect, but to know them through the heart in order to avoid them. Shortly before Gandhi was assassinated, he wrote these on paper to his grandson, Aaron Gandhi. Aaron Gandhi later said his grandfather would have added an 8th danger to the list, rights without responsibility. Aaron Gandhi has also described these as the blunders of the world that lead to violence. One of the world's most widely recognized management consultants, Dr. Stephen Covey, some of you may have read Dr. Covey's books or attended classes about Dr. Covey. In chapter 7 of his best-selling book, Principle-Centered Leadership, Dr. Covey also wrote about these same 7 principles. If we examine the first one, wealth without work, this refers to the practice of getting something for nothing, manipulating markets and assets so you don't have to work or produce added value, just controlling people and things. Today, there are professions built around making wealth without working, making significant sums of money without paying taxes, benefiting from free government programs without carrying a fair share of the financial burdens, and enjoying all the perks of citizenship of country and membership of corporation or community without assuming any of the risk or responsibility. This is often done also by taking advantage of the labor of others without yourself participating in it. Justice and judgment are inevitably inseparable. To the degree that you move away from the laws of nature, your judgment will be adversely affected. You get distorted notions. You start telling yourself rational lies to explain why things work or why they don't. However, inevitably, what is delivered to one is earned, and what is achieved requires effort and sacrifice. What we do of value is in service to others, to each other, and our collective good. Greed, get-rich-quick schemes promising returns without effort or sacrifice always come with disadvantages to others, not in service of others. Wealth from such schemes is a false promise and often accompanied later by harsh judgment. Remember, the production of virtually all goods and services requires the work of someone. So a question worth asking is, are those doing that production fairly compensated for their efforts or the value they add to the finished goods or service? There have always been wealth inequalities in every society throughout history. However, some cultures have better recognized the shared responsibilities by members of that society for caring for each other, particularly for members of the broader community as they age, or perhaps have an inability to care for themselves for some reason. Caring for each other can be considered a social responsibility held by all members of a society to some degree. Those who refuse to accept that responsibility impoverish society as a whole, not just the less fortunate. Some years ago, a story appeared in a business journal about a successful Swedish business executive attending a global conference in Singapore. During the meeting, he was interviewed by an American journalist. The journalist questioned the business executive about his tax rate in Sweden, knowing the rate would be high. The businessman declined to answer the question, despite the persistence of the journalist, repeating the question over and over. Finally, the businessman shared his tax rate with the journalist, which of course was relatively high, at least in comparison to what the journalist was familiar with in the US. The journalist then asked the businessman if he objected to that high rate, if he felt it was fair that the government taxed him at such a high rate. The businessman replied that he did not mind the rate. When the journalist asked why he did not object, the businessman replied, "I do not wish to be a rich man living in a poor country." The next danger to human virtue we're going to talk briefly about is pleasure without conscience. The query of the immature, greedy, and selfish has always been, what's in it for me? Will this please me? Will it ease me? But unfortunately, many people seem to want pleasure without conscience or a sense of responsibility, even abandoning or utterly neglecting others in the name of doing their own thing. But independence is not the most mature state of being. It's only a middle position on the way to interdependence, the most advanced and mature state. To learn to give and take, to live selflessly, be sensitive, be considerate, and be compassionate is our challenge. Otherwise, there's no sense of social responsibility or accountability in our pleasurable activities. Seeking personal gratification or freedom without considering the consequences to others is not simply selfish, it's also immoral. The next we'll talk about is knowledge without character. As dangerous as a bit of knowledge is, even more hazardous can be much knowledge without a strong principled character. Purely intellectual development without commensurate internal character and core values development makes as much sense as putting a high-powered sports car in the hands of a teenager who is high on drugs. Yet all too often in the academic world, we do not focus on character and core values development of young people. With the current efforts by some to avoid topics or subjects in our public education curricula or instruction, that may make some uncomfortable. We should consider the importance of education not only on knowledge, but also on the development of sound character. I also want to talk about the danger of commerce or business without ethics. In his book, Moral Sentiment, which preceded Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith, a renowned economist, explained how foundational to the success of our systems is a sound moral foundation. How we treat each other, the spirit of benevolence, of service, of contribution. Suppose we ignore the importance of a sound ethical foundation in our economic systems. To operate without moral core values and without continued education. In that case, we will soon create an amoral, if not immoral, society and business. Economic and political systems must ultimately be based on a sound moral foundation to succeed and endure. Think for a moment about the preamble to the U.S. Constitution. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. The U.S. Constitution, in its preamble, expresses a set of core values and moral principles as the foundation and essential purpose of our government. Those value statements are the moral principles behind everything that should follow. Unfortunately, we've spent almost 233 years and are still trying to live up to those principles. As the Constitution expresses it, we attempt to form not a perfect union, but a more perfect union. We should understand that as a continuing process of evolving from the less perfect toward a more perfect union, not a task yet completed. Indeed, we should continue the work on that task. The next danger to human virtue that Gandhi identified was science without humanity. If science becomes all technique and technology, it quickly degenerates into man against, not in support of humanity. Technologies come from solving the paradigms of science. And if there's very little understanding of the higher human purposes behind that technology, the technology is striving to serve not humanity, we simply become victims of our technology. As a result, we see otherwise highly educated people climbing the scientific ladder of success, even though it's often missing the rung called humanity and leaning against the wrong wall. Science and all those who practice it should remember the question, how, needs to always be accompanied by the question, why? What purpose does this serve? How will it benefit our collective humanity? I'd also like to talk about Gandhi's principle of religion without sacrifice. Without sacrifice, we may become active in a church, but remain inactive or follow its gospel. In other words, we may adhere to the social facade of religion and the piety of religious practices, but ignore its demands for service to others. There is no actual walking with people or going the second mile to deal with our community's problems that may eventually undo our economic or social systems. It requires sacrifice to serve other people's needs, the sacrifice of our pride and prejudice, among other things. If a church or religion is seen as just another hierarchical social system, its members won't have a sense of service or inner worship. Instead, they will be into outward observances and all the visible rituals of religion, but they are neither God-centered nor principle-centered. The seventh of Gandhi's principles was politics without principle. If there is no principle, then there's no true north. Nothing you can depend upon. The focus on the personality ethic is the instant creation of an image that sells well in the social and economic marketplace. We see politicians spend millions of dollars to create an image, even though it's superficial, lacking in substance to get votes or gain office. And when it works, it leads to a political system operating independently of the natural laws that should govern, that are built into our Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The key to a healthy society is to get the social will, our value systems, aligned with sound moral principles we claim to hold, but often fail to live up to. When our value systems are aligned with sound moral principles, you then have the natural laws, the compass needle pointing to true north. True north representing the external or natural laws of we hold these truths to be self-evident. And the indicator says that is what we are building our value systems upon. They're well aligned. Rights without responsibility. This is Gandhi's grandson, Aaron Gandhi's suggested eighth danger to human virtue. We often refer to the rights granted to us as unalienable rights declared in the Declaration of Independence and as enumerated and enshrined in our Constitution and its amendments. However, we sometimes fail to recognize that those rights require responsibilities from us also, to respect that they belong to all of us equally, collectively, not just individually. When we fail to recognize or accord those rights to all others, regardless of their social or economic status, their heritage, origin or place of birth, gender or sexual identity, faith or none, we've failed in our responsibilities, not just as citizens, but as moral individuals. We also fail the responsibilities test as a community and as a society when we tolerate this absence of responsibility in each other. Reflecting on Gandhi's dangers to human virtue, we note that each considers the importance of one's actions regarding the impact on others, not simply ourselves. In these times of so much social division, can we all regain a sense of community by calling upon us, on each other, to avoid these dangers to human virtue, these deadly sins? How do we do this? To understand that, I will cite Gandhi's first rule of his 10 rules for changing the world. You must be the change you want to see in the world. We must first begin with ourselves. This again returns to the principle of reciprocity, or the golden rule, treating others as we wish to be treated ourselves, forming that social contract of predictability. Being a person of character and virtue is not easy, but ultimately being a good human being benefits everyone, including yourself. I'm going to leave you with this last thought for those of you who may be familiar with Shakespearean drama. In Act 5, Scene 5 of Macbeth, after Lady Macbeth kills herself, Macbeth compares his existence to that of a mere ghost. Life is but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. We are not simply poor players upon the stage. What we each do, the choices we make, express our expectations of others. That expression sets an example, a model for others to follow. It is an attempt by each of us to communicate those expectations that we have of others. It is our following the golden rule, the principle of reciprocity, treating others as we would ourselves wish to be treated. Let us all commit to being the best that we can be. Consider the impact we can make upon the world if only we think of what we do, what we choose to do, affects others that we all share this world with. We are here not just for ourselves, but our existence has purpose only when we are truly here for each other. We can then say we truly respect the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. I'm going to take a moment to extinguish the chalice. But as we extinguish this chalice and wish each other to go in peace, remember, when I say go in peace, I don't mean go in mindless oblivion. When I say go in peace, I don't mean go without challenging yourself or others. When I say go in peace, I don't mean go in utter ease and comfort. When I say go in peace, I mean go in peace seeking justice. I mean go in peace committed to equal rights and opportunities for all. When I say go in peace, I mean go in the peace that is created when together we build communities of true solidarity, deep compassion, and fierce and unrelenting love for all we share the world with. Go in peace.